Good morning, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started in just a few minutes, let folks wake up a little and sign in. So if you need a cup, grab that last minute cup of coffee, go ahead and do that. We'll go ahead and just start in just about a few minutes. So while we're waiting, if you want to go ahead in the chat box, you can go ahead and get the conversation started by putting in your favorite soil critter or organism. So go ahead and put that in the chat box. It could be worms, nematodes, mites. Yeah, go ahead and share your favorite soil critter or organism there in the chat box. Awesome, some great answers coming in. Mycorrhizae, earthworms, fungi, amoeba, wireworm. Awesome. Thank you guys. That's great. All right, for those who are just joining us, we're just typing in our favorite soil critter or organism, get our minds awake here this morning. Really appreciate you guys joining us for this early morning. The idea behind this really is to start to hit folks before they start their day and head out to the fields and head out to the shops. So really appreciate you guys joining us this week. And we know that there's a lot of soil health talks happening, especially this time of year. So we appreciate you guys tuning in and hearing from some local folks here on the Palouse. So just to get it started, my name is Jody Prout. I'm the Education Outreach Coordinator here at Palouse Conservation District. This is the Soil Health Sit Down series, and this is a spinoff from previous events that we've held with the Alternative Cropping Symposium, and then also the Direct Seed Breakfast that used to be held in Colfax. And the goal of these events is to encourage grower-to-grower dialogue about improving soil health practices on the Palouse. With low disturbance farming practices, maintaining residue cover, and adopting cover crops or companion crops into their operation. So we're hoping to continue these conversations in a virtual format with this series. It'll go through February, right before spring work starts to happen. And then we hope to be able to return to an in-person platform as soon as we're able. We'll play it by ear with COVID as best we can. And during the presentation, because of bandwidth issues, if you could please plan to have your video off or yourself muted. If you have questions during the presentation, you're welcome to drop them into the chat box. And then we'll be monitoring that chat box throughout the talk. Presenters will have an opportunity to answer those at the end. We'll also open up the floor to ask questions as well. If you either want to do it through the chat box, or you can turn on your audio at that time and ask those questions. So we know that this is kind of an impersonal experience for sure with doing it virtual. So thanks for making the best of it. Just a real quick about Palouse Conservation District. So we were the first conservation district in Washington State in 1940. So we're celebrating our 80th year this year. We're one of 4 conservation districts in Whitman County, based out of Pullman. And our mission really is to foster that voluntary conservation of natural resources, providing tools, education, technical expertise, and financial assistance to our local community. So we are a government entity, but we're primarily grant funded. So we're able to provide technical and financial resources for landowners in addressing natural resource concerns on their property. This ranges from riparian buffer establishment to direct seed adoption. So if you're interested in thinking about introducing some more conservation practices on your operation, please give us a call. We are still operating. Our office is closed, but we are welcome with available always with a phone call. And we're guided by a board of 5 members, the voluntary board of supervisors with 20 staff. And we're currently seeking candidates for an open position on our board of supervisors. So if you're interested, or if you know somebody that would be a great candidate for serving their community and protecting our natural resources, please head to our website for more information. Today's talk will be recorded and will be uploaded onto our website. Here's our talk from November, so please head over there. We had Isaac Madsen and Jake and Behrens from Green Cover Seed present on their Smart Mix calendar or Smart Mix calculator, so please check that out. We also have recordings from our previous alternative cropping symposium last year, so please take a look at that as well. So. And then we've had some really awesome sponsors to make things happen this year. In a normal year, we would be supported by the Washington State Soil Health Committee to make this happen. And then we recently were awarded funding through the Washington Department of Ecology to continue this programming. And we hope to be able to continue this opportunity both virtually and in person. So many of the sponsors here listed have supported us through the years, both financially and by helping us get the word out. Sponsors this year have donated many of the raffle items that we'll be giving away throughout the series. Today, we're going to be raffling off a gift certificate, $75 to Paradise Creek Brewery on behalf of Shepherd's Grain, and a $25 gift certificate to the Greenery at Spokane Community College. And this is a student-operated flower shop and nursery up in Spokane. To be eligible for the raffle, you just need to be present at the end of the presentation to win. So, and I'd like to recognize our other sponsors throughout this series: Green Cover Seed, Plants of the Wild, Shepherd's Grain, Roots of Resilience, Spectrum Crop Development, Washington State Department of Ag. And then finally, just a final announcement with Spokane Community College. They're now offering a fully online 1-year certificate program in ag business, along with a variety of ag business courses, including crop science. So if you are interested in honing in on your skills this year during the winter, please head over to their website. All right. Okay. Well, we are just waiting for a little bit here for some technical difficulties here, waiting for our speaker to get on. So I apologize. Just hold on 1 minute. Yep, we'll be right back in just 1 minute. Hold on 1 second. All right. Thank you guys for your patience there. All right. So we'll move into today's program. So we have Frank Wolf with Lester Wolf Farm. They are based out of Uniontown, Colton. And he's going to be talking about the pitfalls and successes of interseeding cash crops into a cash cropping system, along with winter cover crops, and figuring that out between the cash crop system. So Frank, on their operation, they receive 16 to 22 inches of rainfall a year. All acres on the farm are currently annual cropped with winter wheat, spring grain, peas, canola, and garbanzos. They're a long-term no-till operation and cropped since 1998 with a cross-slot drill. Frank has found that no-till is one piece of the puzzle to regraining soil health and is now looking to cover crop integration to add back biodiversity to complete the soil health system. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and invite Frank to go ahead and share his screen.
Hi, Jody. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Perfect.
And can you see the screen?
We can see the screen. Perfect. Thanks,
All right.
Frank.
Well, that was a big billing. You made it sound like I can that we've actually implemented the cover crops, and we've been trying. But I'll thank you for the introduction. I'll just move right into our slides.
Perfect. Sounds great.
So I wanted to kind of do a quick recap. Jody mentioned that we were since 2013 we've been trying to integrate cover crops into our farming practices. We've been looking at hay graze, interseed, traditional cover crop to cash crop, and try to plot the work that we did, what worked, along with the economics. And we've really been struggling within our system to try to get those to be fully integrated. In 2019, you guys asked me to come in and kind of present what I was doing, and I found this from an old slide that I thought was really where we're still at and where we're moving forward is our vision. We want to find covers that will be successful in promoting the following: grow either an interseeded or between cash crop rotation, show the ROI, help stabilize or increase our soil pH along with our organic matter, nutrient cycling, feed the biology, less use of synthetic chemistries, and both fertilizers and pesticides. Integrate the covers into our cropping system. It's important for us to maintain income off of all of our acreage for our farm model. We have a lot of rented ground, and so we need to make sure that we have income coming in from all of our acreage. And last of all, we need to make sure that there's not a negative impact to our cash crop or acreage. So jumping right into some of the trial work that we started in 2019, and this is going to carry through the presentation. I was able to collaborate with P&W Co-op, University of Idaho, Palouse Conservation District, and USDA on this project. But I identified 26 different plants, along with some mixes that showed some very promising success for other areas. And so we identified those, put them in a plot. P&W was going to seed those out for me in a grid system randomized plot. We wanted to identify the plant's impact from these 26 different plants and mixes, the establishment, the competition, biomass, attractors and detractors, soil impact, and the effect on the cash crop the following year.
Hey, Frank, sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt you here. We are getting some comments from the viewers. If there's a way that you could close the sidebar of the individual screens on the left side, so folks
you're not
could
actually seeing my slideshow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. There you go. Or maybe, yeah, maybe at the bottom of your screen on the bottom right, you can hit that little button. You're in a different display, so the one that kind of has a
pet here, and they showed up. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. There's a little symbol that has a pedestal at the bottom of the screen on the far right. Yeah, see if that will do it. Nope, nope. Oh. Yeah, I think we're just in a different presenter mode. Oh gosh, maybe under slideshow if we can.
Can you see if I move those bars, does that flip through the screen?
It does flip to the screen. Yeah, it's just as long as I think folks are having a hard time seeing the small print on some of those. So on some of those charts. It looks fine right now of what you can see. So maybe just be cognizant of that when you come across the small small print. Oh.
All right, so let me go back to, where do you want me to start, Jody?
Well, actually, do you mind? Sorry, everyone. Let's, if you can go to slideshow, could you go up to slideshow at the beginning there, at the very top of your ribbon, farther over, the word slideshow. Yeah, right in the middle. Yeah, right there. Perfect. And that, oh, huh, okay. So,
Close my other screen.
yeah.
Go ahead, Jody.
Oh, well, I unfortunately am not sure how we can walk you through that right there. So maybe let's just keep going on from where you were. I think you had gotten to, we did not get to see, unfortunately, these earlier slides. So yeah, if you want to start right here
So
at the
can you see them better now?
we can see them better now, but yeah, when you
Okay.
get to those
So I'll
smaller
go
print.
really quick through those real.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
So you introduced me. So the recap that we were looking at on where we were moving forward from 2019, we wanted to find covers that would be successful in promoting the following. Grow either as an interseeded or between cash crop rotations. We wanted to help stabilize or increase our soil pHs, nutrient cycling, feed the biology, use of less synthetic chemistries. And we wanted to figure out how to integrate it into our cover crop system. It's important for us to keep income from all of our acreage due to our farm model, and we needed to have no negative impact from the cash crop or the acreage. So we went through this plot work that I was doing with P&W Cooperative. We identified 26 different plants and some mixes that had success in other areas. We wanted to identify the impact from in the fields, and we were evaluating for establishment, competition, biomass, the attractors, soil impact, and the effect on the cash crop. So here are the pictures of the plot work. May 14th of 2019, we did the initial planting. Soil temperatures were 52 degrees. You can see the plot drill that P&W brought in. We grid systemed all the plots in a randomized fashion with all 26 different plants and mixes. We evaluated them for through June and July. We were looking at the biomass, weed control component, and we also were looking at them for bloom set or lack of bloom set. This was to help us determine when the blooms were going to be, when they needed to be terminated. Picture to the right is full bloom right before the majority of the crop or the brassicas went to seed. We set out to terminate them. We didn't set out to terminate the plant, we set out to terminate the seed set. So we decided to mow, and July 19th was the date that we decided to do that. Here's a picture of what the plots looked like after we mowed. Some of the plots didn't establish, mostly all the warm seasons. So we had anywhere from 0 to up to 2.5 tons of residue on the ground. What our hope is that we were going to stop the seed set, but put the plants into a vegetative state. What happened was everything went dead. We thought maybe it went dormant, but it all actually terminated and died, other than some of the cool season grasses that were within some of those mixes. So that was kind of disappointing at first, But what we also realized is that all the weeds that were in some of these plots died as well. I don't know how many of you guys have mowed weeds in the middle of July, but it seems like if you mow a weed in July, it seems to shoot right back, and 2 weeks later you're mowing it again. In these plots, there was absolutely no regrowth. In fact, to the point where we didn't feel like we even needed to put herbicide down to seed our winter wheat into it. So there was no herbicide applications between the termination of these and the winter wheat being seeded in October. We wanted to do a full gamut of testing. So again, real quick, weed control, plant density, establishment, bloom stat, insect disease impact was already done. And now we needed to do the post-plot evaluation. This was basically soil testing. Ryan Boylan with Palouse Conservation District came down and we tested each one of those individual plots. We looked at it for organic matter, pH, nutrient cycling, cash crop, yield impact on the next year's crop, which I'll get to. And then the hope was to develop a mix or mixes from the high-ranking plants. This is a large chart, too much to dissimulate what you're seeing, but what it does show us is it plotted all of the data from the soil tests. We plotted all of the nutrients, and then we were able to apply a filter, if you can see my cursor moving up and down here, of the rankings. And those rankings showed us if they had a negative or positive impact on the soil. That was purely looking at the soil function and the soil tests. And so we had some negative impact compared to our checks, and we had some negative impact even on some plants that we thought were going to have positive impacts. Real quick, then we took that to the economic side of it. We plotted what we were able to gain or lose, have a loss on. Our check was 115 bushels. Our best yielding cover crop plots yielded 12 bushels above that. And we actually had some cover crops below that 115 bushel mark. That actually took away from the cash crop the following year, which was kind of surprising, to be honest with you. And then we plotted that against the economic component of it. There was up to a $65 an acre gain over the check, but that is still not enough to offset the loss of the cash crop the prior year. But it is a positive note that we do see a gain from these covers. So the takeaway on these plots showed us many things: weed control potential, input output potential, adaptability of the potential plants used for the cover crop, and possibly alternative crops. Seeding date was also important. It showed us that the cool or the warm seasons will not adapt, even with the soils warming. They did not emerge. In fact, that most of them terminated before they even came out of the ground. You see some germ and they die. We also learned that they were able to amend some of the soils or organic matters. Some of them shot up by 1%. Well, that's pretty anecdotal, but they're over the check. We had over 1% higher organic matter, plus we had some nutrient cycling. One interesting note that I think is really important to key on is we talk about herbicides and synthetic use. Those plots had 2 applications of herbicides in a 12-month period and 24 months between glyphosate applications. And they're extremely clean. Some of the plots were extremely clean the whole way through. Some of them had some weed competition, but in comparison against our check, which was our field right next to it, which was a garbanzo bean, we had 5 applications of different pesticides, fungicides, and only 6 months between glyphosate applications. It also showed a higher return, $65 an acre on that next year's cash crop. So that was the plot work. Now we're moving forward to 2020. We secured a Western SAR grant, partnered with Palouse Conservation District. Scope of this was to look at the establishment techniques of different plants and mixes, both in an interseeded as well as a winter cover crop over winter cover crop mix. We were looking at seeding dates, the success of the seeding dates, and then we were also soil testing the soil health benefits. And we The hope is to reduce the synthetic inputs and monitor the progress over the next 3-year rotation. We just finished year 1 of the spring wheat crop, and the winter crop for winter cover crop mix has been seeded, but nothing to really report on that. Hopefully this will help develop a cropping rotation with the integrated covers. So real quick on the plot layout, we had 7 plots, 1 acre each, and we ran 3 different types of mixes. Again, that collards and turnips came directly from the plot work that we did earlier. They had zero weeds in the plots, so we decided to put that in as a check to see if we could emulate that in a field scenario. And then we identified a pea, sorghum, radish colored turnip sunflower mix for our other. We wanted to see if the warm season have a synergistic effect with the spring wheat that we seeded it with. And then we looked at different planting dates. Seeded at the time of seeding, so I mixed the seed with the spring wheat in the drill, and then we also came back on a couple plots and interseeded into the standing wheat once it established, with the hopes that we wouldn't have to terminate the covers. All of them were very successful in the establishment of the plots. The warm seasons, no matter of the time of the seeding date, none of them showed up. So that was pretty discouraging on the warm season component. We also did the broadcast after the wheat was established in a June and June 15th seeding date. This was to see if we could get those covers to carry over through winter. That didn't materialize. We had a few clovers and brassicas germinate, and then as they started to grow, the wheat outcompeted it and killed them, terminated them. And they still haven't rebounded. There's nothing growing there. The other trial that we were working on was an 8-acre trial. This is the larger field study of the collards and turnips. We identified these again because of the high weed control in the plots. What we found is we still had a lot of weeds and a lot of collards and a lot of turnips. So we ended up having to terminate the collards and turnips. The reason we wanted to let the collards and turnips go all the way to harvest is they don't do a bloom set or seed set. They're biennial, and is seeded in the spring, they won't set seed. But there was just too many weeds for us to let them to take it all the way to harvest. So they did get terminated. It was a late termination. Anecdotal evidence again on response to yield. It was only on 8 acres. We had an 8 bushel increase over the rest of the field. So $44 gross return. The cover crop mix cost me $12.47. So I had a $31 increase over the rest of the field. I would need a 2 to 2.5 bushel increase just to cover the costs with the current commodity price. I don't know if that's the best check. It was on the best ground that we had, sub-irrigated. The rest of the field was quite large, hilltops, north hillsides. So we're going to move forward with this again, but on a full field application to check the economics and the yield. Some quick pictures. This is the spring wheat interseeded with the covers. From the road, you really couldn't see that there was anything interseeded other than the field looked like it canopied quicker. You can also see the middle slide picture in the top of the slide is we did have a lot of lamb's quarter coming as well. So we decided to terminate. This is the size of the interseeded cover crops. The radish is on the top right corner. We had field peas in there. Some interesting note on the field peas, a close-up of the roots. We had all the nodulation. I don't think the nodules were really setting nitrogen yet. They were just starting to turn pink, so probably no benefit from the nodules. But I thought it was an interesting picture that the winter or the spring wheat seed was interwound with the pea roots. And then the last picture is the spring wheat, and what we were really encouraged to see right before termination is we were starting to see some bread locking on the feeder roots. We typically don't see that. If you can look down at the bottom of that picture on the finer hairs, that's typically what we see, is just a lot of white fine hairs in the soil, but no dread locking. So that was encouraging. We thought we were seeing a reaction to the plant starting to work with the soil. So takeaway, and where we're going for 2021, weed control advantages were very low. I think we need to increase our cover crop seeding rate. We terminated way too early. As you can see, those plants had some nice size to them, but we terminated after 42 days, and I think we should probably have waited for at least another 10, maybe 20 days. So I would push this out to 60 days. We need to look at different cover crops and change the mixes. We're going to look more at cool seasons, and I'm going to drop the warm seasons for now. So going forward, my next mix for 2021 and my spring wheat trial is going to be a kind of a combination of that turnip collards, but we're going to add the peas at 10 pounds, turnips at 1, radish at 2 pounds, and the Kodiak mustard at 1. This will be the cost of this. I just did got a cost on it. It was $11.89 an acre. I'll need to have a $2 or 2 bushel an acre increase at 575 right now on commodity pricing. So that we're going to do a full field implementation. We'll capture the data. We're also currently have planted our winter cover crop mixes, and they're too early to tell the success of those and how we're going to terminate them exactly, but we will track that through spring, and then we'll also do a integrated cover on that as well. So more testing. We'll follow the economics on it and document it. So with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Frank. So if you do have any questions this time, you can type them into our chat box, or if you want to turn on your audio and ask as well. So give a moment there if anybody would like to ask some questions. We have probably about 5 minutes for questions. So Frank, I do have a question for you. Did you talk about any changes in pH level you've seen, or is that something you've been able to measure on your operation?
So on the plot work, we measured pHs, and we do soil testing on all of our other fields. But the plot work, we were really interested to see if we could find a pH either increase or decrease. It's anecdotal because they're small plots, but we did see a jump in pHs as well to more neutral.
Okay, great. So it looks like we have a question here from Shane. He's asking, what glyphosate applied on fields previous to your testing? Was glyphosate applied on fields previous to your testing?
On the plot work, I'm assuming, and yes, we applied Roundup the day of seeding those plots, and that was the last Roundup that field received for 24 months. Still hasn't had any Roundup on it.
Okay, great. Any other questions out there?
Well, sorry for the technical difficulty this morning, guys, and I hope you're able to see the presentation. So, thank you, Jody.
Oh, thank you, Frank. We really appreciate you sharing your experience and being willing to put it out there of what you're trying to do and getting your feet wet. So we really appreciate it. That was great. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen here. So kind of switching gears a little bit, our next speaker is Katherine Dentzman. She's a postdoc research associate at University of Idaho and Washington State University. She'll be talking today about community management of herb-resistant weeds and why is it a concern for conservation agriculture. She'll also be talking about current management initiatives that are being applied on the Palouse. Probably some of you have probably talked to her previously in the last year. She's been doing a lot of research, gathering folks. So it'll be interesting to see what she's been up to. Just a quick bio on her. She's a rural sociologist with a focus on environmental and agricultural sustainability. Her research program investigates how farmers' demographic characteristics and sociocultural contexts influence their management actions, and has multiple publications related to this theme. Her ongoing research includes developing community-based management initiatives for herbicide-resistant weeds, investigating the roles of gender and sexuality on the farm, and improving survey research methods for collecting data on US farming populations. She'll be soon transitioning from her postdoctoral position to a new position as a social science program specialist with USDA. So I'm going to go ahead and invite Katherine to go to share her screen.
Okay, is it sharing correctly?
Yep, we can see you and we can hear you. Good morning.
Hey, fantastic. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to talk to you guys. And I'm going to be talking about herbicide resistance, and specifically a project that I'm working on in conjunction with Ian Burke, Drew Lyon, Doug Finklenberg, and a couple other extension educators and weed scientists in the region. And we're looking at a community management approach to herbicide resistance. And so I'll go over a little bit of my background and kind of why I got into this. I'm a sociologist, so sometimes it seems like, well, why are you studying herbicide resistance? And then I'll jump into why herbicide resistant weeds can be studied with sociology, and kind of how I'm doing that and what our project has done so far and where it's going. So just a bit of background on me. I did my bachelor's in sociology with a double major in environmental science. And I actually started out just in environmental science and was required to take a second major in order to graduate with an environmental science degree. And I'd taken a sociology class, and it occurred to me that environmental sustainability had a lot to do with people and society and how society interacts with the environment. And so I ended up doing a double major in that. And then I got my PhD in sociology from Michigan State University with a specialization in ecological food and farming systems. So kind of focusing in on agriculture and food systems as this microcosm of how people interact with the environment and how we can be more sustainable. And then for my PhD, I did my dissertation on human dimensions of herbicide-resistant weeds. And I got into that as part of a USDA-funded research project. And we were really curious about what kind of the barriers were to people managing herbicide resistance, how different groups of people interact to manage resistance, and these kinds of things. And so for that project, I conducted 12 focus groups with farmers in the Midwest and the South. And then we also did a national survey asking people about how they deal with herbicide resistance. And then that kind of led into this involvement with the Weed Science Society of America, who have a herbicide resistance education committee. And so I've been a part of that for several years, and it's a really great organization, and they're doing a lot of work on this community-based management issue. And so herbicide resistance definitely is an issue in terms of, say, economics, in terms of profitability on the farm, but increasingly it's being recognized as also an issue of conservation and an environmental issue. And part of that has to do with, for instance, the different kinds of chemistries that are being used to deal with herbicide resistance. So glyphosate is a chemistry or herbicide that has seen a lot of resistance development in recent years. And it's actually a fairly neutral herbicide as far as herbicides go. So having that become resistant and losing that, some people, especially where herbicide resistance is a very, very serious issue, like down in Georgia, Alabama, Arkansas, that kind of area. Oh, hey, my video is highlighted. Hi, everyone. So down there, I actually talked to a bunch of people down there who said that they were going back to some herbicides that they considered more dangerous or more environmentally volatile. because glyphosate wasn't working anymore. So that was a serious issue. And then I'm also currently looking into the resurgence of tillage to deal with herbicide-resistant weeds when chemicals cannot deal with them anymore. And it's really interesting to see that a lot of people are saying, well, if we need to, we'll go back to tilling. And that's always kind of a stopgap measure that exists for them. So certainly on the Palouse, that's a very serious concern that herbicide resistance might force some people to go back to tillage to deal with that. So I started out my research on this issue with the question, why aren't farmers controlling the weeds the way they're supposed to? And that was kind of a naive position to take. And once I started actually talking to farmers and doing these surveys, that question turned more into what is preventing farmers from controlling their weeds the way they want to? Because I had so many farmers saying, well, I'd love to do X, Y, or Z, or I know that my weeds would be better controlled or that I prevent herbicide resistance by doing these various management practices. But there are these various barriers that were just preventing them from managing their weeds how they wanted to. And a big part of this was that herbicide resistance is very difficult or even impossible to control as an individual person. And people often cited their neighbors or weed seed coming in on trucks that weren't tarped, this kind of thing, as a serious issue for them. And because weeds cross borders, because people are always interacting, there's different communities involving farmers, but also involving conservation districts and bankers and chemical retailers, and all of these people work together to influence herbicide resistance. And so as a sociologist, this really hit home to me as an important issue in controlling herbicide resistance. And so myself, along with some other people on the Herbicide Resistance Education Committee, were looking at this issue of, well, herbicide resistance is very hard to control individually. And it occurred to us that herbicide resistance might be considered as a common pool resource. And so a common pool resource is a valued natural resource that's available to more than one person and is subject to degradation by overuse. So it can be very hard to prevent individuals from using it, and one person's use or overuse reduces the resource's availability to others. So just to give you guys an example, this is the classic example of common pool resources, is where there's a public grazing ground and each person is allowed to put, for instance, one cow on the grazing ground. And if you have one cow from every household that's using the same area, it's not going to get depleted. But if it's a public use area, one person could say, well, I'm just going to put an extra cow in there. Like, why not? But that extra cow may degrade the resource to the point where you can't have any cows. And that one person has kind of ruined it for everyone else. And so we thought that herbicide susceptibility in plants might actually be kind of like this, where one person can overuse a herbicide or underuse a herbicide, not apply the correct rates, and kind of ruin that susceptibility, and then that spreads to other people. So thinking about this as a common pool resource is really a step that our research team has taken. And fortunately for us, there's a ton of research out there on how to manage common pool resources. So if we consider herbicide resistance to be something that people have to cooperate on, that also can be kind of hard to regulate, and one person's use always affects someone else. Well, fortunately, there's a lot of research into how to manage those effectively that we can draw on. So looking at this literature on managing common pool resources effectively, there's a couple different management options, and it really narrows down to 3 different ones. And the first is privatizing. So privatizing the resource, which is pretty difficult to do with herbicide susceptibility and herbicide resistance because they're weeds and they're mobile and they're always moving around. A second is government regulation. And certainly that is an option for herbicide resistant weeds, for instance, noxious weed boards, something like this. But in general, the people that I have talked to have not been super into the idea of more government regulation on farms. And then a third option is community management. So getting the community together to essentially regulate itself or put some certain, some norms in place, some standards in place for how people can use the resource. And of these 3 things, it's been argued that community management is actually even the most effective And so Eleanor Ostrom is a famous economist who studied common pool resources. And one of her quotes is, when the users of a common pool resource organize themselves to devise and enforce some of their own basic rules, they tend to manage local resources more sustainably than when rules are externally imposed on them. So basically, if you have somebody from outside, an external force or a government agency kind of coming in and imposing regulations, say on how people manage their weeds, then that can cause some resentment. People don't feel as dedicated to it. But if a group is getting together on their own and deciding on this and making regulations and agreeing together, okay, this is what's going to work for our community, these are the rules that we are going to abide by, then they have more ownership of that, and it's actually more likely to be successful. So that's one reason to look at community management for common pool resources like herbicide resistance. Another reason is we did this survey, this national survey of farmers that I mentioned, and one of the questions we asked was, should the government develop a policy to require farmers to develop an approved plan to manage herbicide-resistant weeds? And somewhat unsurprisingly, only 9% of respondents agreed in any way that that should happen. But then we also asked the question in a slightly different way and said, should a farmer-led local organization develop a policy to require farmers to develop an approved management plan for herbicide-resistant weeds? And when we asked the question about that, we increased it to 27% of people who are saying yes. And so that was a pretty significant increase, and was showing us that basically when it's the community managing it and the community deciding on these policies, they're much more likely to approve of some kind of required plan to manage herbicide resistance than if that is coming from the government. And so looking into community management as an option a little more in depth, the #1 researcher who has done work on community management of common pool resources is Eleanor Ostrom. As I said, she's a famous economist. She actually won a Nobel Prize in economics for her work on community management. So very, very famous, and has done a lot of great work on this issue. And she has come up with these 8 design principles for building effective community management of natural resources. So she's saying, you know, if you have a community that wants to manage its resources itself, these are the things that are going to need to happen for that to be an effective program. And so first is clearly defining the boundaries of the resource and the use community. So if you don't know who is in your community, it's going to be kind of hard to regulate them. You have to say who is in our community and what's the geographic area. So you have a very clear definition of who is being kind of regulated or is involved in decision making. The second is a balance between who benefits and who is burdened. So essentially, if somebody is putting a lot of work into this, into community management, they should be getting some benefits out of it. It shouldn't be too uneven or unfair. So those who are affected by the rules have a say in making the rules. This goes again back to the community being able to manage itself and make its own decisions and its own rules. Having monitoring, being present and active, and monitors being accountable. So you want to see that everyone in your community is actually abiding by the various rules and management standards that you have imposed. Having graduated sanctions for violations. So if somebody doesn't do what you've agreed on, you don't want to just like throw them in jail. You want to have some smaller reprimand. But if people keep violating it, then you have to get more intense. Having rapid and low-cost conflict resolution tools. Obviously, communities are not all the same. You're going to have people who disagree, so having a way to resolve those disagreements. The recognition of the community's rights by external government authorities. So basically, the government recognizing that the community does have the right to make its own rules. And then for very large enterprises, nested layers of governance, but we're not going to get into that too much. So I looked at these design principles and I was like, okay, these could really be applied to herbicide resistance and community management of herbicide resistance, but they're also not perfectly applicable. And there's some other research looking at herbicide resistance and social issues that I thought was relevant and didn't always match exactly with Ostrom's design principles. So what I did was come up with my own series of design principles that kind of incorporate Ostrom's design principles into herbicide resistance and the knowledge and research that we have about herbicide resistance specifically. And so those 8 are here. And just very quickly, setting clear boundaries, that's pretty similar. being aware of farmer and community differences and needs. A lot of communities are dealing with different weeds or have different agronomic practices. So, and different farmers have different capacities. So being aware of that, allowing the community to lead and govern itself, pretty straightforward. Establishing shared goals and values through active communication, I think, is going to be very important since herbicide resistance can be a serious issue and you want to build up that trust. Raising awareness of the need for community-based management, I think, is very key. A lot of the time, I'll have a couple of farmers who are very passionate about this issue, but aren't sure how aware some of the others in their community are. 6 is recognizing individual contributions and struggles. So who's contributing more, or are there certain people who are struggling a little more with management? Engaging diverse actors. So getting farmers involved, but also getting people from conservation districts, getting retailers and extension involved, university, academics, this kind of thing. And then starting simple and monitoring progress as you go. So with those different principles that I've developed, I'm like, okay, so I have these principles. These seem pretty good. I feel like they'll be applicable. How do we actually operationalize that? So if I wanted to actually build a community for herbicide resistance management, how would I use those principles to help build it? And so what I developed is this community herbicide resistance management toolkit. And so essentially it's this Word document that has these different sections to it and asks a bunch of different questions to get people thinking about the different design principles and how their community might use them, how those design principles apply to their community specifically. So the toolkit is broken into 4 stages. The first is defining your goals and who the community actually is. The second is create a team and refine the goals you have for herbicide resistance management. Then creating an action plan to actually do something about those goals, and plan for how you're going to evaluate whether people are complying and whether your action plan is working, and future management. And so within each of these 4 stages, there are a variety of questions that the goal is to get people together to discuss these and have kind of just a brainstorming session and figure out what the community wants to do. And so for an example, looking at the first stage of defining goals and defining the community, here's some of the questions I would be asking. I would ask people, what are the geographic boundaries of your community? Who and what should be included? So defining the boundaries of the community, both in terms of geography and in terms of people. What does herbicide resistance look like in your community, and how has it developed over the last 10 years? So understanding the context of the community. What are the specific negative impacts of herbicide-resistant weeds on your community currently, and what are they likely to be in the future? So defining the problem in relation to this community specifically, because as I've done my research and gone around, people are dealing with herbicide resistance in very different ways, very different weeds sometimes, and different intensities. And then I asked them, what are key progress points or benchmarks for success? So what would herbicide resistance management look like if it was successful in your area? And what are some major barriers to herbicide resistance and barriers to the key progress points we've identified? So these are just some of the initial questions that I asked to help define the community and what the goals are, and give some context for what the community has been dealing with. So that's kind of the background and some of the theory on what our project is. And here's some of the actual project. So we're doing this work in the Pacific Northwest. It's called the Community Herbicide Resistance Management Initiative. And we're doing this research with 4 different pilot communities. So Northern Douglas County in Washington, the Camas Prairie area in Idaho, on the Palouse in Washington and Idaho, and then in Morrow County, Oregon. We're working with dryland wheat farmers, dealing with varying levels of resistance. And we're hoping to incorporate this research into a future study comparing the Pacific Northwest with other community initiatives in the US and various international examples. So for instance, there is a community management initiative going on right now in Harrison County, Iowa. There's been some work with a zero tolerance community initiative in Arkansas. And then Australia is doing a lot of really interesting things with community management as well. So we're hoping to be able to compare what we're doing on the Palouse and connect it with these other communities, and hopefully everyone can learn from each other a little bit. So there's a couple different steps to our project. The first was just to identify the communities that we're going to work with and individuals in the communities who would be interested. Then interview those interested individuals to get some perspective on what they're dealing with. and what their community is like and identify more people to bring in. And then I created some context sheets so that I understand the community a little more in depth, because you really need to understand what's going on in a specific community before you can start figuring out some kind of management plan. And so to just give you an idea, this is what a context sheet looks like. So I look at kind of the agronomic characteristics of the community, the various institutions that are present in that community, and some social characteristics. So this isn't super important, just to give you an idea of what I do. And then we meet once a month with the group to work through the toolkit and answer some of those questions that I showed you. And so far these meetings have all been on Zoom. It would be great to actually meet together, but you know how that is. That's why we're doing this meeting. And so to give you a rundown, just kind of what one of these meetings actually looks like, because it helps me to understand the project if I can see how it actually happens. Like practically what is going on. And so in our first meeting, we did introductions with the various people who are interested in the project to understand kind of what are our values and what are our goals for this project and why are we even meeting together. So to kind of give it this driving force. And then defining where and who the community is. And so for example, with my Palouse group, we decided that we wanted to define the community as people on the Palouse who are involved in annual cropping, and we're not doing any combination with fallow cropping. And so then we're able to pull up this map that shows us kind of where crop and fallow is versus where continuous cropping and annual cropping is, and get a very clear geographic definition of who is this community, where is it, so that we have some boundaries and aren't just trying to involve everyone in the world, because where do you stop at that point? And then the first meeting, we also go over what is the problem, why is herbicide resistance a problem, and how has it developed in this community over time. And so I draw some really ugly timelines when I'm doing these meetings, but they're also very informative. So I ask people to think about the last 10 years or so, from 2010 to 2020, and describe, okay, what were some important instances in herbicide resistance, some important events in herbicide resistance in your community. So people say, okay, well, 2014, we started to notice serious herbicide resistance ryegrass problems. In 2015 or 16, Zidua came out and bought us some time. And so we talk about kind of how the problem has developed, and that helps me to understand what has already been done, what the issues are that this community is dealing with. So that was on the Palouse, and then just a couple more examples. And you can see that I get a little more excited about note-taking as I go. But the other thing that we've done in some of these first meetings is identify key progress points and barriers to those. So to give you an idea of what some of those things look like, we decided, okay, what would success in community management of herbicide resistance look like? What are those progress points? And we defined, okay, an increased number of people who are actively managing their weed pressure would be one measure of success. An increased number of people using at least one more integrated weed management practice than they currently are. New control technology becoming more available and integrated into local weed management. So whether that's chemical or whether that's a weed it or a Harrington seed destructor or anything like that, something becoming available to the community, whether that's through cooperative ownership or something like that. Engaging people who might not normally show up to these kinds of things, because a lot of the time the groups that I get are the ones that are always very active, very interested, who are going to show up to these things anyway. And if you're going to manage something in a community, you need to engage the people who are less likely to show up. Decreased spending on weed management would be one area of success as well. And then some barriers to this that we identified were low economic margins, for instance, rotating in non-cash crops to start controlling weeds, the cost of products, machinery, etc., the time intensiveness of managing herbicide resistance, and then just comprehension differences across communities and differing mindsets about how to manage herbicide resistance. So moving forward, what we're hoping to do with this project is to continue meeting and developing specific management plans to identify and involve more groups and individuals, secure some funding, and this could look like a couple of different things. So we're thinking about funding in terms of just kind of me and the people at the university continuing to be able to do this work, but then we're also considering funding for these different management ideas and management plans that our communities have. So for instance, people have come up with ideas for equipment sharing, for cooperative ownership, stuff like that, or for paying incentives. We would also like to take on more communities. So we have these 4 communities that are kind of testing some of this with and getting some community management started, but we would love to involve some more communities in the future, especially if we can get more funding. And then there is a limit to how many communities we can actually work with, because we're just a handful of people. So part of the goal is to create kind of this toolbox for communities to self-direct their own management. So that's part of what the community toolkit is for. We're also developing some guides to herbicide resistance management and the different options that farmers have for management practices on the farm. So if you're interested in some of this research, if you want to get involved in any of the communities that we have going, I would love that. Or if you just want to ask some questions, and this is who all is involved in our project and all of our email addresses. I'd be happy to share my slides after everything is done as well. But I think I'm pretty much out of time at this point, so I'd be happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. I think we have time for just one question. If anybody has a burning question they'd like to ask, you could put it in the chat or turn on your audio. All right. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Katie, for your time. Really fascinating work you're working on. And if you are interested in getting involved with Katie, we will put her contact information up on the website. So please feel free to head there if you'd like to be part of this conversation. So we are just about at the end of our time here. And so I just wanted to wrap up a few things. Our raffle, we are giving away $75 gift certificate to Paradise Creek provided by Shepherd's Grain, and Kyle Schultes is our winner for that. And then a $25 gift certificate to the Greenery at Spokane Community College. And Bernadette Gangier is the winner for that. So we'll be in touch with those winners to get those gift certificates mailed off to you. Just another quick announcement, the Palouse Conservation District, we have our annual meeting coming up January 19th. It will be virtual over Zoom. So if you'd like to find out what we've been up to for the last year, please feel free to tune in. We will also be doing our next installment of the Soil Health Sit Down starting in January, January 20th. So it'll be the day after our annual meeting. And we're still finalizing details, so please stay tuned to our website. We'll also be emailing everybody on the list that attended here today. So you'll be able to register through that when that becomes available. And then we'll also be sending out a survey at the end of the presentation. We'd greatly appreciate your time and providing us some valuable input on how we could make improvements for this, any topics you would like to hear, and ways we can continue to support you in your operation. So thank you again for spending the morning with us, and have a great day, everyone. Thank you.